Hello, this is the voice of Benjamin Kennedy again, and we're here with part 3 of Making a Monster. And this video is on assembling the costume. So here we can see that I'm just starting to assemble the torso together. I've got the neck and the torso and the tail together, and that was how I started. I tried to get the main line of the body done so that way the arms and legs could go on a bit easier. What I'm doing in this shot is I'm trying to hook a bungee up to the head and neck to keep it in place while I try to glue it on. It took me quite a bit to get the head glued on because this wasn't the smartest way to do it. Really, you should have some sort of device to be able to hang your suit up or some sort of body form to stuff it with so that way you can get your alignment properly, but I didn't feel like taking the time, and I didn't feel like I had the money to spend on that, so I just did it kind of freehand as you're seeing here. What I'm brushing on to the costume now is contact cement, and that's, keeping all the parts together basically. It's the glue I use to keep the parts together, and this is the first layer. You have to do 2 layers, and in between those 2 layers you have to allow 5 minutes of drying time. But once the second layer has been sitting for 5 minutes, you can press the surfaces together and they'll lock. The brush itself is a reusable silicone glue brush, and I found that they work pretty well, although, I would suggest maybe buying 3 to do your costume with, because I tended to have to go through them cyclically. They do have to be cleaned, and it can be a pain sometimes, and you have to let the glue dry maybe about 24 hours. So I suggest having multiple brushes on hand. So you can see here that I've got the 2 pieces joined together, and that's basically how I joined everything on the costume. Was I just contact cemented all of it, including the fabric. The way I applied the fabric was I just added glue to the very edges of the perimeter of the fabric and the costume pieces, and then when they were ready to be adhered, I glued them on. So I didn't use that much glue to do it, and I didn't put it all over the fabric. It's just on the edges surrounding the perimeter of each piece. So in this clip, I'm starting work on the zipper, and as you can see, I'm cutting out a separate piece of foam to use as the base that I will attach the zipper to. And what this allows me to do is to glue the zipper to the costume without actually gluing the zipper shut, because the glue is just going to be going on the bottom of the foam part, and on the canvas part it has to attach to. I did have to glue the zipper onto the foam, obviously, but I found it was an easy enough process not to get glue on the zip. The tool I'm using to cut the foam right now is a X-Acto knife that comes in a wood carving set. Unfortunately, they don't make it anymore, but you can find equivalents out there. But I did find it was very helpful for these small applications where you need to have a smaller cutting tool to get in. So what you're seeing here are pictures I took when the costume was pretty much assembled. The arms are there, the legs are there. You can see the basic body has all been assembled, and I'm starting to get ready for the final stages. What you're seeing here are details that I added onto the front of the costume in order to add some interesting features to the monster. I found that the majority of the costume could go without any sort of details whatsoever, but the front needed some definition in order to be interesting and to have something more to look at. I decided to stick more with geometric shapes as opposed to shapes you would naturally see on a creature's body, because that made it a lot easier to fill out the space, and it didn't take much to cut them out and glue on. What you're seeing here is a step in the process where we were sealing the costume with the non-flammable contact cement. We did that with the silicone glue brushes I mentioned earlier. My dad helped me do the entire process, and we covered it in, I think it was maybe about 2 or 3 days. It looks a bit green when the glue is applied because we added some paint that was the color that would eventually be the monster's body color to the glue, so we know where we've been, because the glue tends to dry rather transparently and it dries quickly, so it's hard to tell on the materials where you've already been, and if you brush over it too many times you're going to get a much heavier costume. Now you're seeing the last step in the sealing process, and it's hung upside down like this because we were doing the fins, and if you leave the fins in a normal position while you're putting the glue on, it soaks up the glue, and the force of gravity forces the fins to bend downwards, and what that does, it makes the fins curl up and you don't get to see the full extent of them when you're done. So we hung it upside down like this so the fins could be pointing pretty much straight down as we were gluing it. And so when we applied the glue, due to the force of gravity, it just hung straight down, and we were able to make it to where the fins, you could see it as it was pretty much originally intended to. Now you're seeing the initial painting process of the costume, which is basically we applied a base coat for the skin of the costume. There are no paint highlights added yet. The basic goal was just to get the base color on the costume, and it took 2 days to do that. There were two colors involved, and one was the green, which you can see here. It's a dark green, and there was a red involved. The red was a custom color, and the green was a color that is in the Bear library of paints. You can find them at Home Depot or any other store that sells Bear paints. But it took 2 days to do this, and I actually did consider just leaving the paint job like it was, like this, but when I did a screen test, which you'll see later, it sort of came off as just being kind of like a big trash bag that had been colored. So I decided to add more highlights and stuff to make it seem more like a natural creature. So this is the first screen test I did with the costume, at least the first screen test that has me inside the costume. And you can see I'm gearing up to try to move around. I'm trying to see how easy it is to move around in. And it turned out it was fairly easy to move around in it. There are a couple of things that needed to be adjusted inside. The armholes weren't quite big enough, so they were a bit of a strain to fit into and move around in. And as you can see, one of the major things was trying to see if the basic paint job we did in the garage was going to be enough to just leave like that for filming. And I think it's passable, but I really wanted something that I like looking at, so I wanted more complexity to the paint job. So after I did this screen test, I went and I put a couple more shades of green on it. There were two other shades of green that I had already had, and I put them on the costume maybe over the course of 2 weeks. And so now you get to see that I had no help in doing the screen test. I set the camera up and I was able to get inside and outside of the costume all on my own. Of course, it wasn't zipped up. You do need help for that, but you can see that unlike professional costumes, you can get in and out pretty easily by yourself, which is quite an achievement.